Hello, everyone. I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation to speak about the application of the nanosims to investigate geological processes. I'm going to present two examples of projects I've been involved to, but there are many other topics in geoscience and geochemistry where the nanosims is very useful. I will basically start with my conclusion, and it's like a roadmap of my talk. So I'm going to show you that nanosims is very useful to investigate geological processes at the fine scale through two examples. One for the study of trace element composition of experimental samples from diamond anvil cells. I will present you why we do that. And the second example is about the investigation of carbon and water content in melt inclusions. And so I will show you that the nanosims provide insights about the deep earth processes, and for instance can help us to understand how earth formed and also how the layers of the earth, like the crust, formed. And by extension, we can also apply the technique to understand how other planets formed and evolved. One of the main reasons why the nanosims is so useful, it's because it has a very nice spatial resolution compared to historical sims. So I took here the worst example for the regular sims. Here you have on this picture a crater on a sample that was done by an EMS 3F, so an old sims from the 80s. And you see here you have a square in the middle. It actually corresponds to an image acquired on the nanosims, and you see that there is a huge gap in the spatial resolution, and some applications that were not doable on regular sims are now feasible with nanosims, just because we are going from a spatial resolution of a few tens of microns or a few microns down to 100 nanometers. So the Earth is a differentiated planet with several layers. We have a core, metallic core in the middle, then we have a mantle, and the upper layer where we live on is the crust. And this structure was acquired after several big processes. Some of them are cataclysmic. So the first step is the accretion to get an embryo of the planet that is about the size of our planet. Then the surface was covered by a magma ocean, and in this epoch, there was a segregation of elements depending on their affinity with the metallic core versus the silicate that will be on the mantle and then on the crust. And this process of differentiation, you have here two opposite models. The first one would be that there is a homogeneous accretion, so basically all the asteroids and bodies that have been accumulated to form the proto-Earth were homogeneized, and then there is a separation. But after, at the end of the step, then the infalling bodies are not totally melt, and so some of their components can not equilibrate with the magma ocean. And so if we look at the composition of our planet, so here in this plot you have basically in the x-axis different elements. They are ranked according to their siderophile behavior. So the elements on the right are prone to go to the core. The elements on the left are prone to go to the silicates. And if you compare basically the composition of the rocks on the Earth and experimental samples with the composition of the meteorite, so the meteorite, like the Orgueil meteorite, that is basically the component of the solar system, by definition of diagram, they are at 1. And if you look at the mantle or the silicate in the Earth, basically for the siderophile elements, you are going to be depleted compared to the meteorite, to the Earth, to the Orgueil, sorry. And when we run experiments, we do not exactly reproduce the composition of the mantle. When I say when we run experiments at moderate temperature, and moderate pressure. If we want to have a better hint about the processes, we need to run experiments at very high pressure corresponding to the pressure that we have at the interface between the mantle and the core. And so those pressure are around 100 gigapascal. So to get those high pressure, the experimental instrument we use is the diamond anvil cell. So diamond anvil cell is an apparatus where you have a sample, so it's on the bottom right, a sample that is pressed in between two diamonds on a very small surface. You have on the left an optical image of the sample in the middle. The sample is included in a rhenium gasket, and basically an area of about 50 microns is going to be melted at high pressure, so we can get to 100, 150 gigapascal. And using a laser, we are going to heat the sample at several thousand of degrees. Basically, it's going to reproduce the conditions at the bottom of the mantle or at the interface between the mantle and the core. And after everything is melted, then the laser is stopped and the sample is quenched, and we are expecting to have a sample corresponding to what would happen at the interface between the mantle and the core. And so we can look at, for instance, the partitioning of the elements between a metallic core that would be an alloy, a sulfur iron, or iron platinum that would correspond to the core of the planet, and around it a silicate that would correspond to the mantle. So basically we are doing a little differentiation under experiment at the very small scale. And so the sample in the end is basically, so you have here an image of the two diamonds, the rhenium gasket and the sample in between. And the interesting area, so the area that melted and that has potentially equilibrated between the metal and the silicate, is something like 50 microns or 20 microns. And the area where we want to make measurements correspond to this very small region. So here you have what the sample look like when you remove the diamonds. If you break the sample, you see here you have the rhenium gasket. The sample is in the middle, and we have to basically extract the interesting area. So to do that, we go to a FIB microscope. So we are going to make a thin slice of the sample, and it's like a piece of a cake. And this slice, we put it on a silicon wafer. So here you have a SEM image of the sample mount. You have the sample itself. You distinguish in the middle the metal, the core, the metal piece, and around it you have the silicate. You see in brighter gray the silicate part that melted, and the darkest part correspond to the unmelted silicate. So we want to make measurements in the metal and in the silicate around. If I look at a different angle of the sample, this is basically the sample we want to investigate. I can put a contour around it. And the interesting area is in between the red cycle and the green cycle. So you see it's only a few microns. And there are very few techniques where you can actually get accurate elemental composition in samples so small. So you can use TEM, but for trace elements, TEM does not have the sensitivity. So this is why we use the nanosims. So here I'm going to present example from the Suer et al. 2017 paper, where we looked at the partitioning of sulfur, but we have also made measurements on platinum. It's a little bit more difficult, but it works well as well. So we used for the sulfur a cesium primary beam. We made images of 20 by 20 square microns. We collected secondary ions of sulfur, carbon, silicon, and aluminum. We use the ratio sulfur over silicon to obtain a calibration curve using several glass standards to actually obtain an accurate sulfur content in the silicate area. So here you have the SEM image of the sample. On the bottom, you have the nanosims images. you see that for doing image correlation, there is absolutely no problem. The nanosims image are very sharp. And so we can actually select region of interest to extract the counts corresponding to sulfur and silicon, and so sample the molten silicate area at multiple places, and so get the partitioning, so the ratio of the concentration in the core versus in the silicate. Once we have that, I would say the nanosims work is done, but the application of those numbers can be used here. So here you have, I would say, a complex equation. This is basically the equation of the elemental partitioning. I'm not going into detail to this equation, just to show you that it takes into account several parameters, including the pressure, the temperature, the activity of the elements. The reason why we use this equation is that we can perform experiments in some conditions, and then so our experimental points correspond to the blue points here in this plot. And when you have obtained the parameters of this equation, then you can calculate the partitioning at any temperature and any pressure, and you can implement models of the Earth differentiation and then predict what could be the concentration of the sulfur in the silicate during the formation of the Earth. So when the proto-Earth is growing, how the concentration in sulfur is going to change. So basically, this is what I'm showing here. We can go a little bit further, but I will be very quick on this one. This is the sample after the SIMS analysis, and we can do a several round of cross-section using the FIB, and then go to the TEM to have a very sharp characterization of the mineralogy and the structure of the elements, the structure of the different phases. And so we can go to a scale down to the nanometer. But there we cannot make new nanosims measurements because the samples are getting very, very small, and we are facing the limitation of the technique. Now in my second application, my second example is about the formation of the crust. So before I spoke about the formation of the mantle versus the core, but if we go to the surface of the planet, then we have what is represented in the middle. We have the lithosphere, the continental crust, and the oceanic crust. So the rocks are very different at the continent and the ocean, and also compared to the peridotite, because there is this process of fusion and crystallization. And we live on continents. The emblematic rock of the continent are granite, and there are many studies about the formation of granite. And one parameter that is very important to understand the formation of granite is to have a measurement of the water content of the rock that are melting to produce the liquid that are going to form granite. And it is known for a long time that basically water help the partial melting of the bases of the crust to form granitic liquid that are going then to crystallize into granite assemblage. And to determine the water content of those liquids, it's not so easy, because when you form the liquid and it's going to move up to the surface, you can have several processes of degassing or what we call assimilation. So basically chemical exchange with the rock during the movement of the magma toward the surface. And the best way to have an actual measurement of the water at the location of the melting of the basis of the crust is actually to investigate rocks that are coming from this area. And Migmatites are rocks that are formed, that are metamorphic rocks, sorry, that exist at the basis of the crust. And those rocks are exposed to high temperature, I would say average pressure, and they face partial melting. So in some places, they are going to melt. And in some minerals, garnets, you can trap the first liquid that are forming when the basis of the crust is melting. So here you have a migmatite. If you zoom and you use a geological microscope, you would see the typical assemblage of this kind of rocks with garnet, biotite, and sillimanite. And in the garnets, you have tiny inclusion. When I say tiny, they are a few microns large. That can be only glass, or that can be polyphased. And when you have several minerals, it's the typical assemblage of granite. It's quartz, it's mica, biotite, and it can be also, you can have feldspar and another kind of mica that is muscovite. So if I show it in a different way, we are investigating what's happening at the basis of the crust in Migmatites, where we have partial melting, and this melt is basically moving up. It can be entrapped into plutons, and this is where you crystallize granite. But in this process to move up, you are going to lose water, or you are going to change the composition of the liquid. Here, the idea is to look at features that are formed at the location of the melting, and that did not evolve since the entire rock moved to the surface by erosion or another geological process. And so you understand now that the game here is to be able to measure volatile and especially water in some very tiny pieces of glass. When I say very tiny, it's between 5 to 10 microns. So I'm doing that in collaboration with people in Italy. And what most of the time what they are doing is that they are remelting. So they observe that in the rock. And if you expose the garnet to the condition of the partial melting, you are going to re-homogenize this inclusion, and so basically obtain a nice glass where we can perform nanosims measurement. So we have used the nanosims with the cesium beam again, a larger beam than the previous investigation, because here we want to avoid the water contamination from the surrounding. We have also embedded the samples in indium because we want to avoid the use of epoxy that would basically degrade the vacuum and increase the water background in the measurement. And we determine the water content using the OH over silicon ratio. And we correct the ion ratio using a set of standards of non-composition. And you have here an image of the kind of mount we are using. Here, so I'm showing you a nanosims image, but the way we make the measurements here is not by doing images. We are using the isotope mode. So basically, we scan a square and we collect the data only from the middle of the square. And so the typical sampled area corresponds to this red square you have here. So 1 by 1 micron, but we actually scan a larger area that is about 3 by 3 microns, using the beam blanking mode to reduce the surface contamination influence on the signal. And we don't have images that we correct, we just have raw numbers that are corrected due to the calibration. An example of the results we get, so we get water percentage. We have here rocks that are rich in water, and they are locogranite rocks. And what we do with these numbers is we put this data in pressure and temperature diagram, which are typical from metamorphic petrology. And so in these kind of diagrams, I'm not going into detail from non-geologists, I'm sorry, but basically here you have different lines corresponding to phase transition. And also you see that those phase transition are influenced by the water content or other elements like carbon. And so with the determination we have from the nanosims and a little bit of petrography, we can basically say that the rock was actually exposed to this domain of pressure and temperature, and the water content we have in the melt actually correspond to the prediction from experimental petrology or petrology, let's say metamorphic regular petrology. So I put my summary again, but I've been through, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. I would just like to thank my collaborators. So the 2 projects I've been showing you have been possible through the collaboration of several people in my lab in Paris, the IPGP in Paris also, and also in other labs in Europe, in Potsdam in Germany, or in Padova in Italy. And with this, I will thank you for your attention.